Hello everyone, it's Old Guardian here. Hearthstone Rise of Shadows theorycrafting season is on the way, and this time I'm going to take a look at Mage. So in this video I'm going to take a briefly look at the Mage cards, some neutral cards Mage might be interested in, and then I have 4 theorycrafted Mage decks for you. Overall, Mage is getting pretty nice set of cards, support for a couple of archetypes. There's this small spells, this kind of tempo mage support, there's some minion mage support, then there's this sort of value control mage support. So a couple of interesting archetypes coming up for Mage. As for the cards themselves, Kirinto Tricaster, 4 mana 3/3 spell damage +3, but your spells cost 1 more, so I haven't really found a home for this one. Then there's Magic Dart Frog, kind of a new Flame Waker, but actually I was able to play the pre-release Brawl a little bit, and in that deck there was a Magic Dart Frog. And 2 mana 1/3 beast, after you cast a spell, deal 1 damage to a random enemy minion. And I really couldn't make this work in that pre-release Brawl. But that of course is not the actual meta that's going to happen. But dealing damage to enemy minions, it's not a Flame Waker and it's not a Knife Juggler. I had expected a little bit more of this card, but that Brawl experience made me quite bearish on this card now. Then there's Conjurer's Calling, 3 mana twin spell, destroy a minion, summon 2 minions of the same cost to replace it. And this card looks downright insane. You can use this like with all sorts of battle cry minions. If you take value trades and use this 3 mana, that's an incredible value card. And it can also be combined with Khadgar. Khadgar, 2 mana. Your cards that summon minions summon twice as many. So Khadgar really has some insane synergies in Mage, with Conjurer's Calling, with Power of Creation, 8 mana, discover a 6 cost minion, summon 2 copies of it. And with various older Mage cards like Jan'alai and Astromancer, so that summoning stuff is really looking pretty sweet. Then there's some more of that small spells tempo mage support with Magic Trick, 1 mana, discover a spell that costs 3 or less. So you want something to benefit from the Magic Trick. Archmage Antonidas is a good one. Mana Cyclone is another good one. Mana Cyclone looks really strong too. A 2 mana 2/2 elemental battlecry. For each spell you have cast this turn, add a random mage spell to your hand. Individual random mage spells might not be that powerful, but if you can get like 3 or 4 spells with this, then you usually get a pretty good selection of different effects. And you can do that when you play cheap spells like Magic Trick and whatever you discover from that, and stuff like Ray of Frost. 1 mana twin spell, freeze a minion, if it's already frozen deal 2 damage to it. Twin spell really is the saving grace of this card, and then synergies with stuff like Mana Cyclone and Antonidas. Looks like there are some interesting tempo mage tools here. Then there's Messenger Raven, 3 mana 3/2 beast, battlecry, discover a mage minion, so minion mage support. And finally Kalagos, a dragon for Year of the Dragon. 10 mana 4/12, your first spell each turn costs 0, battlecry, discover a spell. So for these sorts of value-oriented control mages, then really interesting piece. As for the neutral cards, well, here's one that's pretty tailored for Mage, Sunriver War Mage. 5 mana 4/4, battlecry, if you're holding a spell that costs 5 or more, deal 4 damage. That's almost like a Blackwing Corruptor of old, and that was a really strong card, so very interesting. Proud Defender, some taunt stuff for these control type of mage decks. Taunt +2 attack while you have no other minions, 2/6. Hecklebot, similar to Proud Defender, but is more meta dependent. Might help against some combo decks or might not, might help going into fatigue. But if you summon wrong kinds of minions, then it might also hurt you. And finally, when talking about these small spells tempo mages, then Exotic Mountseller might work out in those decks. 7 mana 5/8, whenever you cast a spell, summon a random 3 cost beast. So this is kind of like Archmage Antonidas. Antonidas gives you fireballs, this gives you 3 cost beasts. Very similar cards overall. An interesting set for Mage, definitely. And based on these new cards, I was able to build 4 theorycrafting decks, so let's go take a look at what this could actually look like. So looking into tempo mage, for example, I'm not using the frog. I'm a little bit bearish on the frog right now, so I didn't put that one in, but I did put in Mana Cyclone and Elemental Evocation, which allows you to play Mana Cyclone for free. then you can just play a bunch of spells. Use Sorcerer's Apprentice to make spells cheaper, cycle through your deck, deal some damage, draw some more cards with Luna, Cosmic Anomaly giving you some spell damage, Spellchecker, Talnos potentially giving you spell damage, and finally there's Archmage Antonidas, which can just give you a lot of fireballs. One consideration that I had about this deck was whether there should be an exotic mount seller in it or not. I mean, in theory maybe you could run like Antonidas and Mount Seller, then you would have 2 payoff cards at the top. So in case Antonidas happens to be at the bottom of your deck, you would still have a way with the Mount Seller. On the other hand, the Mount Seller is not that immediate because those beasts come on board and then they have to survive, and it comes fairly late in the game, so that's a card that I would need to try out. I cannot say for sure whether it's going to be good or not. But something like this for Tempo Mage. Then there are a few ways to build the Minion Mage. And this build that I made, this is a dragon build. But you could also build it without dragon synergies, so a couple of different alternatives. The weakness of dragon synergies is that you don't get to fit in a lot of taunt minions into this deck. You could put in more stuff like Proud Defenders if you did it without dragons. But on the other hand, dragons do have some advantages too, because Fire Tree Witch Doctor actually gives you spells. Scaleworm has Rush, so it can immediately remove some threats. Scorcher can burn down some tokens. Crowd Roaster can help you remove some bigger minions. So you do get advantages from playing dragons, but you could also try without dragons, get some more taunt stuff going on. And this deck is able to get a pretty good hand size. Witch Doctor is a cantrip. Messenger Raven is a cantrip. Then you have Book of Spectres as the only spell. You have Arugal, so you can just draw a lot of stuff. And when you draw a lot of stuff, then you can play your Mountain Giants, and that can help you. And then when you go later in the game, you have Astromancer, and you can do Khadgar into Astromancer to summon 2 minions. You can go Khadgar into Channel Eye to summon 2 copies of Ragnaros. But what I'm most concerned about here is the early game of this deck and what kind of package that should be. Now it's these cantrips and dragons and rushes and dragon battle cries, but it could also be something else with taunt minions and stuff. Maybe Henchclan Hogsteeds for early rush, early removal. Anyway, the archetype is definitely getting some support, so Mage, you would kind of expect them to play spells, but in this case they play minions. Control Mage is also interesting. You don't have to run a big spell mage anymore, there's not that many big spell synergies, although Sunreal War Mage does require that you hold some kind of a bigger spell. But other than that, you can go for these more low-cost spells again. So that opens up stuff like Doomsayer Frost Nova, that opens up the Frost Bolts, the Fireballs. And this build that I have here, this control build is really focused on summoning minions in the end as the win condition. So there's Khadgar again, Khadgar and Power of Creation, summon 4 6-drops, Khadgar and Conjurer's Calling, summon a bunch of stuff, and then you can just do like Astromancer, Conjurer's Calling, so then you Conjurer's Calling the Astromancer, you get 2 random 7-drops, and that 1 random card according to your hand size. Or you can do Channel Eye Conjurer's Calling, although you prefer to do Khadgar Channel Eye, because then you get 2 copies of Ragnaros. Just able to summon really impressive boards time and time again in the late game. But what is the real survival plan of this deck? Without Jaina, healing is very limited. There are also a lot of questions around this deck still on how it's going to be able to do its things. But overall, looks a bit different than Control Mages have been, and I'm pretty excited to be able to play something like this. Finally, I built the control idea from a little bit of a different perspective, this time with dragon synergies. So maybe a bit of a classic Freeze Mage style, Alexstrasza, Fireballs, Frostbolts. I chose to include 1 Pyroblast because I really wanted to use Sunreal War Mages. And this way I have 5 spells that activate it, Blizzards, Flame Strikes and Pyroblast. I might be able to get more spells that activate it because I have Fire Tree Witch Doctor, so I can discover some additional spells as well. There's the Scaleworm for Rush, there's the Scorcher for Battlecry, there's Crowd Roaster for removal. Overall I'm pretty excited about this build. Using the power of dragons, but on the other hand also doing almost Freeze Mage style things. Once again over here the question really is, okay, what about the survivability? no armor gain, only a little bit of healing. How do you survive? That's the big question of these control type mage decks going into Rise of Shadows. And obviously we don't have the meta yet, so every time you try to build a control type of deck before you know the meta, that's a little bit awkward, because control deck by definition has answers to whatever your opponent is playing. And in order to have those answers, you need to know what they're playing so that you put in right types of answers to your deck. Like, would this deck run something like Ice Barrier? Or should this deck run more Taunt Minions? It's hard to say at this point, but overall I am pretty excited about combining dragons with control mage spells. That seems like it could be a lot of fun in Rise of Shadows, and I really hope that this is going to work out in some form. This is now the 8th class that I make these theorycrafting videos for. You can find them all on my YouTube channel, and there's one more to go, and that is Druid, and that will come out tomorrow. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more.